What's a fact that sounds like a conspiracy theory? The Church of Scientology had members secretly infiltrate U.S. government agencies in order to destroy unfavorable documents and investigations into them. Ernest Hemingway suffered from ongoing paranoia that the FBI was surveilling him, which was thought to be a key factor in his suicide. Most chalked it up to mental illness at the time. Decades later, his file was released, proving he was under investigation for his ties to Cuba. His phones were tapped, and he was right all along. Tax service companies such as Intuit spend millions of dollars a year lobbying to make sure the IRS does not make it easier to file your taxes. JFK's brain was removed during autopsy and stored in an archive. Its current whereabouts are unknown. Project Sunshine, in which the US government, in the wake of dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ordered a major study to better understand the effects of radiation exposure nuclear fallout on the human body, so an international network of agents was recruited to locate recently deceased children, and steal body parts from them to use for testing. Diamond company De Beers sits on an estimated 50 years' worth of yearly carats sold in jewel-quality stones, purely to keep the market price high by creating artificial scarcity. Precious stones are, in fact, not so rare as to merit the high prices they command. There's a psychological reaction called the backfire effect, which essentially means that people, after they're given proof that what they think they know is absolutely wrong, will believe their misinformation even more deeply. Everyone, even from Roman times, knew asbestos was bad for your health. Same with lead. There are no old lead miners. In 2/3 of all US states, EMS is not considered an essential service. As such, it receives next to zero government funding or support. There was only recorded homicide in New York City on September 11, 2001. The people who died because of the attacks weren't considered part of the homicides for that day because a very high number like that is a statistical outlier that would throw off accurate record numbers. The one person who was murdered was a Polish immigrant named Henryk Syriak, who was nowhere near the attacks. He was killed in the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of Brooklyn at around 11:40 p.m. The Pentagon has never been able to account for more than half its budget. The CIA funded and organized the overturn of several South and Central American socialist governments. The Pentagon has an insane number of bathrooms because as they were building it, the segregation of bathrooms ended. Lots of people in Pakistan knew where bin Laden was hiding. Government surveillance whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed in 2013 that the U.S. National Security Agency NSA was conducting mass surveillance on citizens, collecting data from internet communications, phone calls, and other sources. The UK government secretly tested biological weapons on its own coastal towns to see how far they could make it inland. How big tobacco companies denied the health risks of smoking, despite internal knowledge of the dangers. That corporations openly bribe politicians to get what they want, they call it lobbying to get away with it. The US government did biological warfare testing on the public in San Francisco. Bioweapon testing in San Francisco. CIA sold weapons to Iran to finance far-right rebel terror group in Nicaragua. GM, IBM, and Ford played a major role in rearming Germany in the 1930s. George Bush's grandfather, Senator Prescott Bush, was a director and shareholder of companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of the German forces. Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center (MCC) in New York City on August 10, 2019. On August 9, 2019, Epstein's cellmate was transferred out, but no one took his place. The two guards who were assigned to check his jail unit that night fell asleep and did not check on him for about 3 hours. 2 cameras in front of Epstein's cell also malfunctioned that night. Oil, rubber, and car companies influenced government agencies to pull funding from public transit and focus more on policies favoring the use of private vehicles. That's why public transit is poor in so many places in the US that had far more robust transit systems in the first half of the 20th century. White flight and redlining also contributed to this, drastically increasing the size of unwalkable suburban areas and languishing cities. 15 out of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis. The US authorities shut down a lot of evidence to the families affected. The court cases are ongoing. The same company that single-handedly caused the opioid crisis is still making money off of their drug, but now also making money off of its antidote. The McDonald's PR machine tried to ruin Stella Liebeck's life. That coffee was so hot it melted her clothing to her genitals. People still believe she was at fault. I turn it around and ask how they'd feel if a parent accidentally spilled coffee on their child that was so hot it melted the child's clothes to his body. Somehow it usually wakes people up. The time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth is approximately the same as it takes it to rotate around its axis, which results in always the same side of the moon being visible to Earth. We never see the dark side of the moon. 100 fact, but I'm guessing the flat earthers are loving it. Edit added quotes around dark. The Hawaiian royalty was toppled by a fruit company dole. The quinoa craze in America had devastating effects on Bolivia. Bolivian farmers switched to growing quinoa to export to the US because it was much more profitable than other staple foods. As a result, along with various other factors, Bolivia has really poor food security for its own people. Almost all glasses frames are made by the same 3 major companies, which is why they cost so much for frame that are essentially just molded plastic. The US government once experimented with a program called MKUltra, which aimed to research mind control and behavioral modification techniques. The Central Intelligence Agency CIA ran this program from the 1950s to the 1970s, involving various controversial and ethically questionable experiments, including the use of drugs like LSD on unsuspecting subjects. While it might sound like a conspiracy theory, MKUltra is a well-documented historical fact. That PR and advertising firms are actively engaging in psychological warfare to push certain viewpoints and values in both implicit and explicit ways. If you control a person's thoughts, emotions, and reactions, then you can begin to control their behavior in almost any sphere of life. The US systematically destabilized many countries in South America. Humans used to visit the moon, then we just stopped. The idea of a carbon footprint was propaganda created by BP in order to deflect their responsibility in the climate crisis, for which they hired the same ad companies that had convinced people that tobacco didn't cause cancer decades earlier. That the Volvo XC90 has had 0 fatal crashes in the 21 years they've been on the road. Big Bird and Walter Cronkite were both considered to be a part of the Challenger expedition, the one that blew up. Remember Fillmore's rant in Cars? The oil companies got a grip on the government. They're feeding us a bunch of lies, man. Weird and a little insulting. They passed that off as a joke. That morgues are hesitant to hire men because of the things they've historically done to the corpses. Colin Powell went before the United Nations and cited false and misleading information in order to justify invading Iraq. GM, Firestone, and Standard Oil bought up, dismantled and sold abroad, urban train systems in the US post-WW2. Cities replaced the trains with buses from GM, on Firestone tires fueled by gas from Standard Oil. The government protected us though. They were found guilty of having a monopoly and fined $5,000. High place phenomenon, urge to jump into the void when in high places for apparently normal healthy individuals and is rather commonplace feeling, says the literature. Slave trade into the Middle East was a much larger industry than the transatlantic trade. 16M slaves vs 9M slaves. Slaves were castrated upon landing, so they had no offspring, and therefore there's very little record of it ever happening. In the United States between 1932 and 1972, the CDC intentionally neglected to inform hundreds of Black Americans that they were infected with syphilis. The goal was to study the effects of syphilis in Black people when left untreated, meaning it was imperative that the patient be unaware that they were infected. Many of them died to the untreated illness. Edited remedied some misinformation. MLK Jr.'s family sued the United States government for his wrongful death and won, proving that the US government was involved in his killing. The King family asked for $100 in compensation, as the point wasn't to win money but simply prove there was a conspiracy by the US government to kill the civil rights leader. This is important info is left out of most US public education, and when I tell people they don't believe me, even though it's public record. War on drugs was conceptualized and strategically implemented to oppress Blacks. It was not an outcome, but its purpose. Source: Nixon tapes. MK Ultra. The whole thing down to the name sounds like it was made up. Also, everything they still have done. Stuart Little was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. The leading cause of unnatural death in the 20th century was being killed by your own government democide. That companies make stuff that easily breaks or soon won't work on purpose, so you have to buy more. Planned obsolescence. MK Ultra was a top-secret CIA project in which the agency conducted hundreds of clandestine experiments, sometimes on unwitting US citizens, to assess the potential use of LSD and other drugs for mind control, information gathering, and psychological torture. There's a book by Tom O'Neill that lays it all out. Honestly reads like fiction. When Halliburton arrived in Iraq during Gulf War II to monitor the ports, they removed the flow meter valves used to measure oil being shipped out of the country. They weren't replaced for more than 5 years. It's all in the Iraq Study Group Report 2006. I think apps on our phones are spying on us because I can mention something in a conversation and will get targeted ads out of the blue. I feel like this type of thread really requires sources to be cited. The CIA pushed crack in order to fund a Central American civil war. The FBI targeted and attempted to manipulate both the civil rights and segregationist movements in the 50s and 60s because they thought both sides were too anti-government. John Harvey Kellogg designed cornflakes to stop masturbation. The CIA have been shaping the world in the interests of the United States for the last 60 to 70 years. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments happened. America tested nukes on their own citizens. There's a huge global problem involving criminals stealing sand from beaches. The entire story of Henrietta Lacks. The CIA made a weapon known as the heart attack gun for assassination purposes. It was a pistol that quietly launched a small dart containing a shellfish toxin that causes heart attacks. There's a famous photo of Senator Frank Church showing off the gun during a congressional investigation into the CIA. Planned obsolescence. The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, believed in eugenics and was a known racist. She's responsible for sterilizing thousands of minority women, many times with the intent on minimizing their genes. Here to let everyone know that just by calling something a conspiracy theory doesn't make it false. There are many theories academics and scientists present them to build knowledge, and some are about conspiracies. Some conspiracies happened, others didn't. MK Ultra, Gulf of Tonkin, Operation Gladio,